very pleased to introduce our last panel of today, followed by our last keynote speaker. This panel is all about the emerging energy issues that we're going to be facing in the next few years, and we're going to take a deep dive on it. The session will be moderated by David Sandalow, who used to be Assistant Secretary for Policy and International Affairs at the DOE, as well as acting Undersecretary of Energy. David Sandalow has joined us at Columbia University early 2013. He's still the inaugural fellow at the Center on Global Energy Policy at the School of International and Public Affairs. He's joined on stage by Sergej Mahnovski, who is the director of the Mayor's Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability. Gary Rahl, who is Senior Vice President at Booz Allen Hamilton. Lisa Frantzis, Senior Vice President of Strategy and Corporate Development at the Advanced Energy Economy. Fred Krupp, President of the Environmental Defense Fund. And finally, Dr. Lawrence Jones, who is the Vice President of Utility Innovations and Infrastructure Resilience at Alstom Grid North America. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Florian. And I want to start by thanking all of the organizers of this extraordinary day. This is really tremendous. Let's give them a big round of applause for the incredible job that they've done. I've been involved in enough of these to know that a day this filled with really good conversation and this smooth doesn't happen without a lot of hard work and a lot of good and thoughtful work by a lot of people. So many thanks to all of you. And a big thanks to Florian for pulling together this panel, which is quite extraordinary. We have quite a range of talent here. And our theme in this panel is going to be emerging issues. And let me just tee it up this way. About 20 years ago or so, in the early 1990s, there were 15 million cell phones on the planet. Today, there are 6 billion cell phones on the planet. We've seen similar deployment curves for personal computers, which basically nobody owned 20, 25 years ago. Today, they are ubiquitous. 10 or 15 years ago, most people had never used, many people had never heard of a GPS device. And today we carry them around in our pockets and have a hard time imagining navigating without them. But at the same time, energy systems change slowly. It took us about 100 years to move from wood to coal as the primary way of generating energy. It took about another 100 years to move from coal to oil. We've been talking about wind and solar energy as a major form of fuel since the 1970s, but today they provide less than 6% of the energy in our electric grid. So why do energy systems transform slowly? There's a number of reasons. Experts often point to the long-lived nature of the capital assets. They point to low investment in innovation. They point to incumbent political players that exercise a lot of power. But it's interesting, in the past 5 years, we've had 2 examples of rapid change in energy systems. We've had shale gas revolution, which has changed the energy landscape in the United States and the world, and we've had solar panel prices drop by 80%. So I think an interesting question is, are we entering an era in which we're going to see rapid change in energy systems? What's over the horizon? What are we going to be paying attention to in 1 year, and 5 years, and 10 years that we're not paying attention to today? So those are some of the issues that we're going to get at in this dialogue right here. We have an extraordinary group of people here to talk about it. And just going to start with about 3 to 5 minute kind of thoughts from each of these folks on what they're interested in, what they're working on, and then go into some questions and some conversation, then go to you. So it's really a great honor to have Fred Krupp here on the panel. Fred is well known to everybody here. 29 years head of the Environmental Defense Fund. Was, as much as anybody on the planet, one of the people who drove market-based innovation in the environmental sector. We were thrilled at the US Department of Energy to have Fred working on Secretary Chu's task force on natural gas and environmental issues on natural gas. So Fred, thank you. And what are your thoughts?
Thank you, David. Well, I think the problem is pretty simple. Getting to the solution is a little bit harder. The problem is that in the energy space, the generation of electricity provides an enormous amount of the pollution that's spoiling the planet. And we simply have to proceed with reducing the carbon content of generating and using electricity. And we have to do it at an affordable cost, because there's a lot of ways to do it at an unaffordable cost, but an unaffordable cost won't be politically sustainable. At a level below that, David, I think there's some design criteria for the change that we seek that probably are implicit in all of our minds, but I'd like to take a moment just to make them explicit. One is that this change has to be really rapid, and it has to be fundamental. We can't settle for slow, incremental change. We need the step change. I'm just repeating what Richard Kaufman said a few minutes ago. We need the pace of change to be faster. Another design criteria is the one I mentioned above. It's so important I want to mention it twice. We need to keep the costs low to make sure that adoption is widespread. And adoption being widespread, to me, means markets. Markets have been the best way on the planet to organize activities. We need to use markets. I was so happy to hear Richard's talk, because that was his thesis, and that is the only thesis I can imagine that is going to get widespread penetration of clean technologies. And finally, after the storms that we've had on the East Coast, my power in my house has been out 3 times for 8 days or more in the last 2 years. Irene, Snowtober, and Sandy. We need resilience. That's another criteria. So to me, you look at the electric grid, and what do you have? You have a thicket of bureaucratic rules that impede markets, that aren't designed to stimulate innovation. They make a lot of sense for yesteryear, but right now it's a thicket of rules that prevents new entrants and prevents competition and puts roadblocks in front of distributed energy. That thicket of rules needs to be surgically corrected, and it's mostly a job for Governor Cuomo, Governor Kasich, Governor Hickenlooper. It's mostly a job that will be done at the state level. There are things the FERC can do. There are things the FERC has already done to speed this up. There are things that the regional transmission organizations, the RTOs, can do. But most of what needs to be done needs to happen at the state. And so, that's the way I see it. And it's not just distributed clean energy. I do want to say it's also energy efficiency. We need incentives for retrofits. We need demand-side management incentives so people can sell into the grid. We're doing a good job in PJM. We've got a toehold at allowing companies to make lots of dollars by shifting the demand to times when we have more supply, and that allows capital to be used more efficiently, and that allows penetration of renewables to be much higher. So those are some opening thoughts as to how I see it. I think the other thing I would just say is we also need to be smart about natural gas, because natural gas is something the country is using a lot more of. But if we're not smart, the methane leakage undermines the greenhouse gas advantage. If we're not smart and we build a whole lot of new capacity in natural gas, we're locking in a new fossil fuel for the future. If we are smart, we minimize for the 28 trillion cubic feet of natural gas this country is using, only 1/3 for power generation. We minimize its impact on global warming. We maximize the climate advantage of substituting it for coal, and if we're smart, we ramp up the underutilized capacity in order to knock out coal. But it's a big thing happening in the country, and we have to make sure we do it right.
That's so interesting, Fred. I just want to follow up on one point, because Richard Kaufman made this very interesting point about market segmentation in this area. An Environmental Defense Fund has done some of the leading work on working with companies and working with consumers in the environmental area. Have any reflection on Richard's points about segmentation and how they apply in the work that you've done?
Well, I think Richard is exactly right. I think you have to, a lot of times we think about, things that need to be communicated, the public that needs to be educated. That sort of thinking is too sloppy to allow us to make progress. Got to think about where are we trying to get to, and which are the audiences, and which are the segments of the market that need to be moved. And I think that's the sort of precise thinking that allows us to come up with tractable answers that move the needle. Otherwise, I fear we're just a talk shop, chat.
Great. Let me come back to this and jump to Lisa Frantzis. Lisa is Senior Vice President at Advanced Energy Economy, which is a national association of business leaders working to make the global energy system more secure, clean, and affordable. Lisa is also a veteran with extraordinary expertise in this area, more than 30 years of expertise in consulting in the energy area. She worked at Navigant, and we're thrilled to have her. Lisa, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. Well, yeah, I was asked to speak a little bit about renewable technologies as a starting point, but I am leading the 21st Century Electricity CEO Forums at AEE, which I'll probably weave into some of the Q&A. But just to give some background on the forecast of where some of the renewable markets are going, I put together some data and information I thought I'd share with folks. The global market for photovoltaics, which converts sunlight into electricity, globally is about 35 gigawatts, and we're expected to see that to grow to about 73 gigawatts by 2020. And that's $150 billion business opportunity a year. The key markets right now are Asia and Europe. We're seeing a lot of growing markets coming out of the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, and those CAGRs are on the order of about 36% between now and that same time frame. So a lot of opportunities out there. The U.S. Market is still growing significantly, and I'll talk about some of the challenges we have in the U.S., but this year we're expecting about 4.7 gigawatts of installed capacity in the United States on an annual basis, and that's expected to grow to about 7.8 gigawatts in 2016. And that's when the investment tax credit that we've talked a lot about today is due to expire. That rough market share of the U.S. globally is about 11%, and it represents about a $23 billion per year opportunity. What we've seen is a lot of excess capacity coming into the marketplace. We went from about 30 gigawatts just in 2 years to 70 gigawatts. The Chinese have been basically the top, of the top 10 Chinese manufacturers have represented about 7 of the top 10 players. And with the convergence of third-party financing, the investment tax credit in the U.S., and the overcapacity, we've seen prices come down quite significantly on the photovoltaic side. We're running roughly at about $2,000 to $3,000 a kilowatt for large-scale systems, translating into power purchase agreements on the order of 10 cents a kilowatt hour, which was phenomenal, right? When I was starting this in my career, we were never near that. And the challenges, though, we have now is that as these larger amounts of PV are getting into the grid, the utilities are beginning to question the net metering rules that are out there. So that's one of the key challenges I see that's going to be critical in this sector on the solar side. Just last week, APS tried to get through an $8 a kilowatt fee. And what they're basically saying is, look, you're getting the net metering for selling at the retail rate back to the grid, but all the customers are paying for the T&D, the backup generation, all the fixed costs that go with supporting that intermittent renewable resource. So as a result, they're trying to get some kind of standby charges or fees to compensate for that. This is going to be a huge issue for the solar industry in the U.S. They weren't allowed to get the $8 per kilowatt fee. They got 70 cents per kilowatt passed, but I see that as being probably one of the bigger issues that's going to be facing the solar industry moving forward, in addition to low natural gas prices and RPSs that are being met. On the wind side, the total market in 2012, we're looking at about 45 gigawatts globally. China really dominated that market with market share of about 29%. In the U.S., the market this year is not nearly as good as it was last year. Everybody was scrambling to get things in before Production tax credit policy was uncertain, and so we had close to 13 gigawatts installed in 2012. This year, by the end of the year, we're probably closer to 2.4. So a real drop-off on wind installations in the U.S., and I think also low natural gas prices don't help that as well. In terms of the pricing, though, we are looking at very aggressive power purchase agreements going in for wind energy systems. We're seeing prices around 3.8 cents a kilowatt hour, which is terrific. Offshore wind, as we heard earlier, is probably closer to 18 cents, so not nearly as competitive. In terms of the forecast and where we're going, cumulative global wind markets we're expecting will grow at a CAGR of about 13% between now and 2017. So this is a little bit down from what it's been over the last 5 years, which has been like 18%. Offshore wind, we're at about 2.6 gigawatts globally and expected to go to 8 gigawatts by 2017. Large market opportunity in China, Germany, UK, where a lot of the offshore activity is happening. I'm hoping we'll see some here in the US at some point too. And then the US market will have relatively slower growth, even moving forward, not like we've seen in the past few years. We're expecting roughly about 6% CAGR per year. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One is low natural gas prices, uncertainty around the production tax credit, and then many of the 29 states plus DC and other couple of territories are meeting some of their RPS requirements, and that's been a lot of the driver for some of the wind installations that have gone into the marketplace. So that's sort of a nutshell on the renewable side. I'd love to talk about the utility business model work that we're doing as well, but I'll wait till we come around with some of the Q&A.
That's tremendous. Thank you. We'll come back to that. I'm particularly delighted to have Lawrence here on the panel. We've traveled the world together some. Lawrence is currently a senior vice president at Alstom, where he's held a number of top jobs. He is the founder of the Center on Sustainable Development in Africa, and I didn't know until I read his bio that he's also a member of the board of Chess Challenge in DC. I look forward to hearing about that, Lawrence. And holds a number of patents. Lawrence, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. I think this is a very interesting panel. I have maybe just 3 comments to make. The first goes back to the point I think both Fred and Lisa talked about in terms of, looking at what we need to do with regards to the climate. Technology-wise, David, I must say, talking to utility executives around the world, technology is not the issue. It's kind of hard to hear our technology companies saying technology is not the issue, because we can actually build the technology. Right? The real issue is policy. The real issue is policy, and I'm not just talking about policy in North America. I'm looking at it from a more global perspective. Just in Morocco recently, where there was discussion about the Atlantic, organized by the German Marshall Fund, talking about the Atlantic Basin. There's huge energy resources in the Atlantic Basin. So the resource is not the issue. The issue, I think, is one, like I said, policy. The other thing that I think is very important, and I think, Fred, you alluded to it a little bit in terms of us being smart. I think we need to accept the fact that when Richard talked about customer segmentation, as I look in the audience here, I ask the question, how many of us will expect to lower our life standard if we were to see increased energy consumption and increased price? Not only do we have to change how utilities function and how policies work, we have to change how consumers behave. Consumers themselves have to be prepared to accept a change in their lifestyle. And I think that is a very interesting question, because when you do a survey and say everyone wants clean energy, everyone wants a resilient grid, but are you prepared to pay for it? And I think part of the challenge we face as an industry is that on the one hand, we've designed perhaps one of the best machines the world could ever have, called the power grid. We've made it so reliable that today when you discuss increasing reliability, there are people who ask you, why do we need to do it? Because we have 99.999% reliability in many of the systems today around the world, where there are systems. So the real issue is resilience. And I believe that resiliency is going to drive a lot of the discussion, a lot of the investments we see. When Lisa, you talk about Utility 2.0, I think a lot of the discussions there will be around resiliency. But I think as we discuss energy policy in the U.S. and we look out into the future, I think we should not forget that energy is now a global issue. A lot of the discussions we're having here about the utility models, about renewable growth, about flattening of load, It's the same discussions being held in Brussels today. It's the same discussions being held in Australia, New Zealand. So it's a global phenomenon, if you may. And I think that begs the question, where will innovation come from? Is innovation going to come from North America? Or is innovation going to come from Africa, where you don't have a legacy regulatory infrastructure, where you can actually experiment much more aggressively with things like microgrids, with things like how you fund these systems? The last point I will make has to do with this issue of urbanization. It kind of ties back into this whole issue of energy. When you talk a lot about energy in North America, we have to remember that population growth, urbanization has driven us to have the systems we have today. When you broaden the discussion and see what's happening around the world, is most of the world is still emulating the United States in terms of urbanization, larger cities. And now I know there are a lot of people here who believe that urbanization is good, but there is also the downside of urbanization, because if Africa, for example, is going to urbanize and industrialize, following the same trajectory as the US and Europe, what does that mean for the world? So I think it's great to have the discussion about where the future is, but I think the future for energy in the US is intricately related to the future of energy in Africa, the future of energy in Europe, and the future of energy elsewhere. And so I think we perhaps might want to globalize some of this discussion, because there are a lot of things we can learn from Europe, from Africa, and vice versa. So I'll stop there. And
we've got a lot of interesting thoughts here on utilities, which is a natural segue over to Gary, who's got a lot of expertise in that area. Gary's the Senior Vice President of Booz Allen Hamilton. He's worked for public and private sector clients at Booz, including ARPA-E at the Department of Energy, which we were very grateful for. Knows a lot about utilities and oil and gas and other topics as well. So your thoughts, Gary?
Sure. So just by way of perspective, I would mention a couple things that sort of inform us at Booz Allen and lead us to think about the things we're thinking about. One is the work we do for ARPA-E, which David mentioned, which is helping them try to develop disruptive technologies into an energy system that, for a lot of reasons as described earlier, is very resistant to disruption. We also do a lot of work with the Department of Defense, both on their installations and the deal making that they do around large-scale renewables at installations, and on the operational side, which is dealing with the energy issues that warfighters have, which is a whole different range of technologies, in addition to other work that we do in the commercial sector with utilities and oil and gas. I would say, overall we are more optimistic. We surprise ourselves with our optimism about the potential for disruption in the energy system broadly. But a lot of what we're focused on is trying to understand the disruption cycle and the disruption pathways, particularly around technology and innovation, both technological innovation and business model innovation in the energy system. And when a lot of the analogs that come out for that, telecom industry and others, I think are helpful to draw encouragement from, but may not be all that helpful to draw specific lessons from, and we may talk about that. But I'm also, in listening to Richard's talk and something Fred said, I couldn't agree more about the need to get beyond sloppy thinking, particularly when it comes to users and customers and participants in the energy system. And I'll end with just this, the opening part with just this thought. I've spent a lot of time working in energy efficiency, and one of the critics of energy efficiency will ask you to believe two things that can't simultaneously be true. One is that on the residential side, most users, most homeowners, let's say, residential consumers of electricity, the energy bill, their electric bill is such a small part of their household budget that they don't care enough about energy to be a day trader for a couple of dollars a month to manage it up or down. And at the same time, critics of energy efficiency will tell you if you raise rates in order to send a signal, that people will come out of the woodworks like torch-wielding mobs in the Frankenstein movie because they care so much about their rates. So I think to really understand how people's relationship with energy, you've got to get to the level of customer knowledge and market segmentation that we've talked about.
That's great. Well, thank you. And we are at Columbia especially delighted that Sergej Mahnovski is able to take time to come be with us. Sergej is director of the Mayor's Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability, manages citywide energy policy here, and as many of you know, really had extraordinary strides in the past couple of years under Mayor's leadership, guided by Sergej Mahnovski. He served as the Mayor's point person on energy since 2010. His work has included focus on Sandy response, of course, on Indian Point and some other issues. Sergej, before working for the mayor, was at CIRA and RAND Corporation. Sergej, take it from there.
Dave, thanks. It's an honor to be here with this group. And the perspective I take is one of what can cities do in this period of tremendous innovation in the energy sector. And really it was articulated in our office by the mayor back in 2007, which is how do you take one of the oldest mega cities in the world and ensure that it's a place that is more livable for potentially 1 million more residents by 2030, a place that has cleaner air, cleaner water, and one that is, if you think about the world's population, 50% of it lives in cities today. By 2030, it's going to be something like 75%. So the urban energy and sustainability problem is one that's going to be with us and growing. And if you think about for a moment the marvel of engineering that is New York City, we have, if you took all the copper that's under the ground, be I think the 3rd largest copper mine in the world. We have the longest underground tunnel in the world that brings us water from the pristine watershed by gravity down here. We have a transit infrastructure that gives us one of the lowest carbon footprints of any major city in North America. So this infrastructure served us tremendously well. It's been the backbone of economic growth and quality of life in New York City. But how do we take this tremendous endowment that we've got and really incorporate really the tremendous period of innovation that we're seeing in energy and other distributed systems, business models that are outpacing some of the regulatory practices, and really move the needle on things we care about, like air emissions and quality quality of life. And I think, you know, it was great to see Richard Kaufman talking earlier because I think really we're seeing right now at the state level some of those questions really being tackled head on. So we're very delighted to be working with them. You know, some of the new challenges that we're seeing, obviously Sandy, but even before that, we've seen 2 historic peak load days associated with heat waves the last couple of summers that really have put a lot of strain on the system. Hurricane Irene, and then of course Sandy. During Sandy, if you think about it, roughly a quarter of the population lost power, 43 people died. It was 6 hospitals fully evacuated. When climate scientists look at the future here in New York City, we're going to see potentially as many 90-degree days as Birmingham, Alabama, and potentially up to almost 3 feet of sea level rise, which are going to put tremendous strain on the system as it is right now. So we've been working, I think, very well with our utilities and our state partners to look at how do you revitalize this sector, to what degree should monies be spent on things like storm hardening, critical infrastructure, and really opening up the sector to really a tremendous amount of investment in distributed generation, distributed resources, and really taking a hard look at the utility business model. And I'm happy to report that just a couple weeks ago, the mayor announced that New York City has the cleanest air that it's had in 50 years. And part of that is, and I have to say hello to our friend Fred Krupp. Environmental Defense Fund has been a key partner with the city. Over the last 6 years, we've seen something like a 60% reduction in SOx and a reduction in particulate matter emissions. Part of that, not all of it, but part of it is due to programs to clean out heavy fuel oil from the sector. And Environmental Defense Fund has been a tremendous partner and leader. And thank you, Fred, for your leadership. And I think finally, really the mayor has tried to look at really making New York City a hub of innovation, bringing the new Cornell Technion campus to Roosevelt Island, really to bring a cadre of engineering talent to face some of the challenges for the next generation. This is really a generational issue. There's going to be billions of dollars invested in the sector that are going to transform the way we do things. And I think what we're going to see over the next year from Richard and his team is going to set the course for the architecture of the system for years to come. So it's an exciting time to be here. So.
Thanks, Sergej. So over the course of the day, I've been listening to a number of the panels. There's been discussions on utility business models, discussions on renewable finance, discussions on shale. And this is about emerging issues. So I just wanted to ask the panel for any quick predictions. A year from now, what do you think the hot issues are going to be? At the next Columbia Energy Symposium, some predictions.
I mean, I don't know. I've been doing a lot of work leading these utility CEO forums on the 21st century electricity system. We're doing these in conjunction with MIT, and I'm just seeing a whole wave of interest in this particular topic. And I think it's starting now, but I think it's going to begin to sort of take over and be a key issue. You've got at EEI, Edison Electric Institute, talking about the death spiral of the utility because they have all this infrastructure cost. Meanwhile, people are coming on the grid with energy efficiency and renewables. They're losing revenue, or they have flat or declining revenue. On top of that, they have intermittent generation, like renewables coming on the grid, that they have to account for. People no longer just care about safe power and affordable power and power for all. Now they care about resiliency, like Lawrence was saying. They care about environmental sustainability, greater customer control, flexibility. There's a lot of other issues now that the utilities have to deal with. And we've run now 4 of these. We did one actually in New York 2 weeks ago. Richard was there. We had a great group. We've done another one in Massachusetts, and we've done one in Texas and in Aspen. And here's where we're bringing regulators in the room with the utility companies as well as the advanced power companies, and we're finding just an amazing amount of ability and interest in sharing information to figure out how we move forward, to think about different ways utilities can make money and earn profits. How do you change the business model? How do you change the regulatory framework to incentivize others to maybe come in and do business? And I think that's going to be a very hot topic next year. I'm already seeing kind of the wave come into that direction.
People are talking about it now. Your prediction, Lisa, is it's only going to grow.
I think
What
so.
other panelists think?
Well, I think two things, and not just one, David. 2 things. One, I think system thinking is going to accelerate. We're going to see more focus on system thinking as we look at infrastructure, both from the regulatory standpoint, because the interdependencies between the infrastructures we have mean you cannot just have an electricity regulatory model that forgets about water, or a model that forgets about other kinds of services. So we're beginning to see that already. The German Marshall Fund is doing some work on that. There are others who are beginning to look at it in Europe. So this idea of system thinking is going to become a very hot topic because setting regulatory models in silos is not going to cut it in the future. You're going to be able to tap into different infrastructures. That is where you will find leverage in terms of how do you put together a right sort of a rate case, which means the utility business model might end up being not just changing, but in fact the utilities might end up going back to providing not just electricity, but other kinds of services. So I think the service-based model for utilities is definitely going to be a hot topic. And the last technology hot topic for the next year, I think, is going to be big data. I think big data is going to get more interest because at the end of the day, it's difficult to come up with a very simple closed-form equation to describe our energy system of the future. And you have to look at big data technology to make sense of all the information we're gathering.
I do. So similar to that, I do think the grid becoming more transactive and dynamic is going to lead to a range of topics. I think big data and data analytics are a piece of it, but I think it also enables a number of different business models. I guess if I were to bet $1, I would probably bet we're also going to be talking about infrastructure banks and green banks and the public role in infrastructure finance again. I think I don't know if I'm the first person to guess this, but it just seems like there's a deal to be had around taxation of offshore corporate profits and coming back into the country and using some of that money to fund infrastructure bank. There's rumblings about that. It would be interesting if that happens, but certainly in New York's experience a year on or so with the Green Bank, I think we'll have a lot of interesting things to talk about.
How about the net metering debate over the course of the next year? Any predictions on that? Let me ask this, is any state going to significantly change its current net metering law in the next year?
Well, we just heard about Arizona. Last week they came down with their policy, but I know the Southeast is trying to do things around that. I know they've come up with a lot of resistance, but I can tell you, I was on the board of SEPA for 4 years, and I can tell you right now it's a hot topic. They're trying to convene people nationally. Oh, SEPA is the Solar Electric Power Association, so it's a group of all the utilities. Sorry. I'm sorry, I'm so used to talking about these acronyms. But anyway, they're putting together a national initiative to try and come to more agreement on how to deal with this. Because if you do away with net metering, which allows you to sell your power back to the grid at the retail rate, like let's say 15 cents a kilowatt hour versus the wholesale rate, which is more like probably 4 cents a kilowatt hour, it really impacts the economics of the photovoltaic system. And on top of that, they're saying, well, maybe if you're doing net metering, you have to pay some kind of fixed charge or a standard fee to account for what I was talking about earlier. You know, there are fixed charges like T&D infrastructure. Somebody's got to pay for it, and that you shouldn't be cross-subsidizing it across the group. So I think it's going to be definitely a continuing issue, and it is a very emotional issue. If you were following what was going on in Arizona, it was very political, it was very intense. Everybody came out in force because nobody wants to set a precedent that could impact other states.
You know, change is inevitable, David. I think change in the utility policies can be a good thing. The question is, to what extent is that change designed to fortress protect the incumbent utilities, and to what extent is the change that's going to come designed to have a livable world for the utilities, but have them more as engines of change and engines of distributed energy. And we get to decide by our participation in front of the PUCs, all of us in the room, which way it goes. Change is inevitable. The question is, can we help to shape that change? You know, looking over at Sergej reminds me that he only gave half the context for the cleaner air in New York, so I want to just take 30 seconds to say that the Environmental Defense Fund was involved. Thank you for your thanks. But Sergej and his boss, Mayor Bloomberg, drove that. 2,700 of New York's biggest buildings have been converted out of burning sludge to cleaner fuels. And the statistics Sergej gave, he understated just a little bit. In the winter of 2008, the air we were breathing as heating season began, right about now, compared to last winter was 70%, just about 70% cleaner in terms of sulfur, and 35% cleaner in terms of this metal, nickel, that we breathe when we live in New York that comes out of the sludge that's burned in the apartment buildings. You know, the black smoke that you see? That's what it is. That's what they're burning. The mayor has banned that, but more than banning it, starting in 2015, he's come up with a series of mechanisms to accelerate the transition to cleaner fuels. And bravo. I mean, it's been, EDF couldn't do that without Mayor Bloomberg.
And David, if I may, I mean, some of the, I think of it from the project perspective in the city, some of the most interesting projects and policies involve, you know, breaking down the silos between agencies and regulators in the state and the city. This one example for, it was, you know, you had a regulation phasing out fuel oil, but we wanted to do it quicker. So we, you know, brought the finance community and the buildings community and the gas distribution utility together really to make it happen. Otherwise you couldn't. If you'd only pulled one of the levers, it just wouldn't have happened. So that's, you know, we're very proud of that. You know, there's other ones. You know, there's really interesting pilot projects going on right now. For example, can you take food waste and put it in the wastewater treatment plant system as a digester? That's taking, you know, essentially waste from one sector that doesn't ever connect with the other one. Or, for example, taking a wastewater biomethane and putting in the gas distribution utility as renewable gas. We're working on a project right now, and that's where the Public Service Commission, the city, and the utility are involved. Or putting, at a brownfield site, putting utility-scale solar panels. That's going to depend on net metering, remote net metering legislation. So all these are all coming together in many ways. A lot of the most interesting projects that cut across agencies and jurisdictions we're seeing them happen right now. So.
Can I just make a comment? Sure. So one of the interesting things about this discussion, I noticed a very New York dominated discussion we should in New York, but around the country, I think states are experimenting differently on these different issues. So if you go to the West Coast, for example, they have one approach to deal with things like net metering based on their resource availability. The same in the Midwest. So I think one of the beauties of what we're seeing here, with all due respect and love for what New York is doing, I think from a national perspective, we really need to look at different regions and see the best practices in terms of what they're doing to address some of these issues that you've addressed in New York already. So when you come back to the situation you talk about, Fred, in terms of, you don't want the incumbent to be, sort of protected or shielded. I think we should really look at this issue of systems thinking when it comes to policy making again, because yes, net metering is good, but there are some unintended consequences because at the end of the day, the average consumer still expects the utility, the old utility, to be the one who's providing electricity, right? So I'm okay with us sort of deconstructing the model, but how do we communicate that deconstruction and the risk that comes with it? Because when the lights go off, most consumers still go to their historical old utility as the one who's responsible.
A quick follow-up on your point, Lawrence. You referred earlier to Europe and Africa and the discussions that are happening there. In your travels and experience, do you find similar dialogue happening in other continents about utilities as is happening here in North America, or is it different?
It's exactly the same at different levels, of course. In Europe, they're facing an issue there because when it comes to renewable, Germany and Spain, they've done things there that kind of messed up the system, right? In Spain, you put in place a policy for renewable and then you take it back, right? Yeah. So all of a sudden, disincentives are being put in place there. In Germany, you went too far, some would believe, with regards to the feed-in tariff. So that discussion is being held. In Africa, the big thing we see happening there is the huge potential for microgrids and off-grid systems. Albeit there are those who think we should still invest heavily in Africa in terms of centralized power station. I think personally, and this is not an Alstom view, it's my own view, I think it's a mistake, because why would you want to de-urbanize or urbanize Africa to the point where agriculture becomes threatened? Because food supply is another issue that is tied into this overall energy mix, right? So I think you see in a lot of discussions around the world, it will be interesting to see what happens in Japan. They're about to create a new electricity market in Japan because of what happened at Fukushima. Let's see what happens there. So there are lessons to learn around the world, which I think that's why I like my job. It's just fascinating.
I want to go to the audience in a few minutes, but before doing that, broaden our time scale here and think 5 to 10 years in the future. And in order to do that, I actually want to come back to New York and focus on New York and ask Sergej about another storm in New York in that time frame.
Please.
No. Let's hope that New York does not get hit by another superstorm. But let us just imagine, and I know you've been planning for this possibility, Sergej, but 5 or 10 years from now, would the impacts be different than what happened a year ago? And what would it take to make the impacts be different?
Well, so let's say our estimate of the Hurricane Sandy impact was roughly $19 billion in the New York City area. If you think about by 2050, climate scientists have estimated the same probability of storm would have caused $90 billion of damage. That's a very daunting number. So we've set out a plan, some 257 initiatives from coastal measures, $3.5 billion coastal plan, to looking at building codes and hospitals and utility infrastructure. So we've looked across infrastructures because there's not one magic bullet. You can't put a fortress around New York City. So I think 10 years from now, you're going to have, I think, many of the coastal measures either in place or somewhere in development. You're going to see, I think, we're working with the Public Service Commission right now to look at, critical nodes in the system and where do we raise seawalls, where do we build things differently. We have a plan around hospitals. So I think 10 years from now, you can never climate proof, and you never want to fight the last war. We estimated that at Hurricane Sandy had happened 6 to 8 hours before. It would have been a different part of the tidal cycle. It would have hit a different part of the city. But I think the plan is very robust because it looks across classes of infrastructure. And so I think we're going to be in a better position, both better, the infrastructure is going to be more resilient, and it's going to be more, in some cases, more distributed. You're going to have pockets of resilience so that you're not going to have whole swaths of the city that are going to be out of power. I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll be in a better spot, but it's not just storms. You're going to have, again, stronger heat waves and other climatic events that we're also looking at. So.
Thanks. So just keeping the focus on 5 to 10 years in the future, and just offer this observation. In 2006, the U.S. Energy Information Agency wrote its annual report looking forward about what was going to be our nation's energy future. That report didn't mention the word shale gas. So with that in mind, I wonder, are there issues that anybody wants to speculate that 5 to 10 years from now we're not talking about now that we will be talking about in 5 or 10 years? Any guesses or speculation?
I mean, one thing we haven't talked about yet is, more the integrated systems, of electric vehicle charging stations with PV and storage. I mean, I'm also thinking, 5 to 10 years out, we're going to see a lot more integrated systems operating more at the distribution level or operating at a home. So their homes will have more of a black box in their own self-generation, be it a fuel cell or integrating more demand response. I mean, I think all these various technologies that typically have been operating in silos will begin to come together with the advent of the smart grid and data communications and more advanced control technology. And so I think that can work in our favor relative to some of the situations like another Sandy hitting 5 to 10 years.
If I can put you on the spot, will any of those ARPA-E projects that you've been advising on, will they change the world? Any other big changes you see coming in the area you're working on?
5 to 10 years is tough for the kind of R&D they do. I do think there are a number of technologies that have promise in this idea of, in the electric power grid and the idea of the transactive grid that actually will make the grid from generation to distribution more efficient, even more efficient as it is now, than it is now, which I think will be an interesting sort of niche set of technologies to watch, and it'll be interesting to see what effect, if any, it has on everything that's affecting the evolution of the grid in that time frame. If you had asked me a little bit of a longer time frame, I probably, in an effort to be maybe a little, contrarian or something, would say, it seems like there's been this, a couple of years ago I would have said there's sort of this horse race on between electric vehicles and biofuels in terms of what the next sort of transportation fuel is going to be. Electric vehicles seem to have pulled ahead, but there's a lot of interesting R&D going on around biofuels. And I'll mention one. ARPA-E has coined an area of research called electrofuels, in which electricity and CO2 and certain other commonly available chemicals and bacteria are brought together, in essence, to skip photosynthesis, where now we make biofuels by the sun shines, plants grow, we turn the plants into fuel, and it's a lot less efficient. Skipping the photosynthesis step actually buys you a lot in terms of energy efficiency, and it's one of those dark horse areas that could bring biofuels back into the mix.
Other thoughts about 5 to 10 years?
David, the question makes it sound like things are fated. And I think it is probably fated that we'll have tremendous technology development. Sensors will become cheaper and more ubiquitous. We'll be able to tell. We already have the technology to tell when transformers are wasting energy. We'll be able to tell air pollution on every street corner. It'll be really cheap and really easy. I think that's fated. Graphene, Gary may know more than I do, but I'm excited. Carbon fiber has revolutionized so many things, everything from a blade of a hockey stick to the wing of an airplane. And graphene is even another material that has enormous promises. I understand it, which isn't too well, but it's kind of like atomic scale chicken wire, 50 times the strength of steel, with the ability to carry electricity 5 times, more than copper, and lightweight, half the, much less density than copper. The applications for battery storage, for solar cells, are potentially revolutionary. I think the question, though, is will these things be deployed? Do we open up the market like we did with cell phone technology when a court busted Ma Bell? Do we create the changes in our PUCs, Public Utility Commissions, here called the PSC, in New Jersey called the Bureau of whatever. BP, yeah, blanking on it. The different names in different states, but the question is, do those policies allow these technologies to be deployed, or do they stifle them the way for so many decades phone technology was stuck in the rotary phone, or the, then we had the big jump to the princess phone. I mean, you have to open up a market, or these great, gee whiz things aren't going to penetrate.
So I like what you just said, Fred, from a technology provider perspective. But we've had this discussion going back to the topic of superconductivity. 10, 15 years ago, there were a lot of projections about what superconductivity was going to do. We have the same thing now where there are a lot of projections about these different technologies. At the end of the day, when you go to a PUC or PDC or however you want to call them, many of those folks are either appointed or elected. And so because of that, the risk aversion they have is if a utility says, I'm going to put in a new graphene-based technology, it's going to cost X. The amount of effort that utility has to do to convince the PUC, who, by the way, is thinking about keeping rates low. So the point is, there's a chicken and egg. You want lower rates, but you want graphene. Well, graphene costs a little bit more. It's more reliable, so reliability might improve. So it's up to those in the audience here. Do you guys want graphene-based power grid? If you say yes, the PUC has cover. But until they get that political cover, they're not going to make the kind of change you're advocating for, because that is the real challenge. I mean, we have a lot of technology Alstom would love to bring to the market. If you just allow the PUCs to, deal with the rates.
But it is happening. I mean,
it is.
In the 21st century electricity system forms that were happening, actually New York happens to be probably one of the more progressive.
New York is very unique.
But there are other states that are not far behind. I mean, they're also,
true.
Massachusetts is doing interesting things. California is. I mean, I think there is a lot of people who are looking at the Rio model in the UK, which is a performance-based model. There are people who are looking at ways of opening access to third parties to come and not just have it be the utilities who are supplying things to the customers. And that people are looking at ways of incentivizing the utilities based on the value they provide to customers versus just the volume of kilowatt hours sold. So, I mean, things are getting looked at. It might not move as fast as we all want it to, but it's slowly starting to happen. And I think, that's why I'm excited about my job at AEE right now, is that we're starting to find those pockets of states where that activity is happening and trying to just accelerate it a little bit. But it is going to take time. I mean, they're used to doing business a certain way, and hopefully we can change it.
All right, we have an extraordinary panel. We also have an extraordinary audience. I want to have anyone who wants to ask a question, give them an opportunity to come in. Looks like we got one taker right off the bat. Yes, sir. Why don't you identify yourself and ask your question?
I'm Diego Riaño. I'm going to NYU. I'm doing a master in public administration. And my question is, talking about emerging issues in environmental energy, what about carbon taxes? Is going to be an emerging issue? Can we talk about a system of an international carbon tax? Because it wouldn't matter much if only US make that transition if we don't talk about big countries of China, Brazil, of the European Union. If we create a system that changes the way the economic system is driving the relationship between energy, costs, and consumption.
We absolutely need to make energy pay the cost that it's imposing on society. So we absolutely need a carbon tax, and we need to price carbon into a system of limits on how much carbon can be thrown into the air, and those limits have to absolutely decline over time. Now, but things are happening on this. In the United States, we have this. In California, we have it to some extent in the utility industry in the Northeast with RGGI. When we'll have a chance to have this debate in Congress probably isn't this year or next, but we need to start talking about it now. So thank you for your question. And worldwide, there is movement too. South Korea just adopted a cap-and-trade system. China now has 1/3 of their economy covered by a carbon cap-and-trade set of pilots. The most advanced one is in Shenzhen, which has been the engine of economic change in China. So it needs to happen. You're absolutely right. It is happening. It's probably not happening in Congress this year or next, which is, I think, why we focused on some other things. But you're right. That is the most important fundamental change that could be made.
Just a quick question. Could you say some kind of range in which that carbon tax would vary here in the States in the eventual case Congress approved that? Like what would be the price?
Yeah, he wants a price.
The price.
I wouldn't touch that.
I don't have my crystal ball today.
Exactly, I agree. Don't touch that one with a 10-foot pole.
So following up directly on that, EDF pioneered cap and trade for the acid rain law in the US. An obscure financier named George Soros has identified the idea that because we have a California GHG program and RGGI, and we have a European ETS, and we're hopefully going to have China on board, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that instead of an overarching international framework or even a federal law, cap and trade, which we didn't get in 2009, that a bottom-up approach is really going to be much more efficient. Do you have a thought on that, Mr. Krupp or others?
My thought very quickly is that is a great way to build, brick by brick. So David Victor wrote about it years ago. Great idea.
Well, the only thing I would say, last month at the Copenhagen Global Green Growth Forum, a lot of discussions was about just this point, how grassroots activities can sort of drive the pendulum towards raising up this concern about carbon tax. The interesting thing at that conference, David, was that for the first time, I think the Chinese vice premier, he actually stood up and espoused on how polluted Beijing is, publicly, right? Which was unusual. Yes, it's very seldom you will hear sort of a high-level ranking Chinese official talk openly about the challenges they're having about climate. So that's a good sign. I mean, for him to make that statement at that public event was very encouraging for those of us who were there to hear him say that. So things are happening.
Great. You just note I'm going to need some help from our conference organizers when you want us to wrap this up. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I have a question about transportation. You talked about the cars using EV or biofuels, but what about airplanes or ships? Those may have impact on international trade, but do you have any prospects on major breakthroughs of technologies that may be able to utilize biofuels or any new kind of alternative energy to operate airplanes or ships in a more cleaner way?
Well, I know we had one CEO forum on natural gas fuels, actually. So we had 4 on electricity, we had 1 on natural gas fuels, and one of the key markets that they were pushing actually was for marine applications. It's a huge opportunity for natural gas fuels. There's been some talk about the biofuels for that segment as well, but I do think that the challenge there, though, that came out during the session is that the infrastructure and the time it's going to take to kind of get the pieces to align to make that happen are challenging. But it's probably going to happen offshore first before it happens onshore in terms of making like the natural gas fuels market really unfold for that kind of application.
Do you see in the next 5 to 10 years lots of changes in the world's natural gas infrastructure? Any of the panelists? We have the first export permits are being granted for export of natural gas from the United States, something that 10 years ago would have shocked almost anybody who was paying attention to the issues. We have essentially 3 different global gas markets, North America, Asia, and Europe, but simplifying slightly.
Well, I would say this, David, that the Chinese government, as Lawrence has just said, is very motivated to clean their air. And they're burning a lot of coal, and they're planning to burn more coal. And if they can do natural gas right, protecting the locals around the places they want to develop, they have large resources of technically developable shale. Whether it's actually developable economically or not is unclear. They will build a lot of natural gas infrastructure. They're already signing contracts whether or not they can develop their own shale with neighboring countries to import both natural gas through pipelines and LNG. So I think if they get it right, it can be a very good thing for the world's air to knock out some of the coal that they're already using and otherwise planning to use, especially true in China. And that will be a place where you see natural gas. If you see it take off, it'll be a very good sign, I think.
Yeah, the other thing I'll just comment on quickly is that we have seen that organizations like Ryder Trucks or FedEx, you know, the large entities that have a large number of fleets, they're the ones who are probably moving forward the quickest to ensure that they will implement natural gas fuels on their own vehicles. And so the infrastructure within those little pockets are probably what you're going to see first. Like they'll focus on Southern California, and we were talking a lot about that in the session. So I think that's where the infrastructure will likely unfold first.
Lisa, one quick cautionary note on that is when you replace coal with natural gas, you can get a climate benefit if the methane leak is less than 2.8% for the first 20 years. It's a lower number because the IPC has just revised its figures and told us that 86 times methane being released is 86 times more potent climate forcer than CO2. With diesel fuel, we're down at about 1% or less to get an advantage. And the opportunity for methane natural gas to leak out of trucks, buses, fueling stations, we're studying that now with some of the companies. But before promoting switching to natural gas and assuming it's good, it may be good for American independence from having to import oil, but for climate, for the concern that Tom Steyer, pivotally involved in AE, and I and most of us share, it's not yet clear if it's a winner or a loser.
Are you talking about natural gas liquid fuels or natural gas?
Natural gas, period, all natural gas.
I was talking about natural gas liquid fuels, but yeah, natural gas fuels.
Same thing, natural gas liquid fuels, same thing.
The Northeast is also constrained right now in natural gas. You can see some build out. We saw the first natural gas pipeline to be built into New York City in 40 years, announced just a couple weeks ago, and so that's a new development. You're going to see some more in the Northeast also, and that's going to help. There's a fuel oil problem, I think, not just here but in Connecticut as well. Heavy fuel oil being used for boilers.
Great. I think we have time for one last question, and then we're going to wrap up.
It has to do with the 5 to 10 year outlook, and it's about a new technology of fuel. It's gas hydrates or methane hydrates, which I think is like frozen methane, which is at the bottom of the ocean. And I believe we have a lot in the Gulf of Mexico, and I know Japan is trying to commercialize it. Do you see that being something that can happen in maybe 5 or 10 years? And then to go with that, since it's pure methane itself, what the greenhouse gas effects of that would be?
Anybody want to comment on that? No. Methane hydrates. You're absolutely right. The world has a lot of them. Yeah. They're right now, they're not commercial to develop, but there's a lot of interest in doing it. Some people have said that if this does become commercial, it makes the shale gas revolution look small in comparison.
Just before you do your wrap up, going back to this point, one of the things I find very interesting is whenever the world finds something that is in surplus, the world assumes that it is the solution to the world's problem. And I just find it interesting that, okay, the world has a lot of that, but no one thinks about the unintended consequences of these kinds of resources because we haven't tried it before. And then when we bring it up and start to test it, then we say, oh my God, this was the wrong thing, right? So we'll see.
The key determinant there will be leakage. How much of that methane, if it's exploited, leaks unburned. And it's a really important issue. The Environmental Defense Fund is spending $15 million now to measure all parts of the natural gas system to figure out ways to quantify the leakage and then stop it, minimize it. And this is something that Governor Hickenlooper in Colorado, Anadarko, Noble, and Encana get a big shout out this week. On Monday, the governor announced a major new first-in-the-nation program to actually limit methane leaks leaks will be cut by about 40% from the targeted sources in this first of its kind new regulation that's been proposed by the governor of Colorado.
Anybody have any final points to wrap up before we? Okay, well, this has been an absolutely tremendous panel. Great talent up here on stage. Many thanks. Let's give them a big hand.